Well, this afternoon I was intending to plant some broad beans, and I may still get to do that, but right now it's decided to rain. So I thought I'd come into the greenhouse here and get out of the rain and record a video for you that has been requested several times. And that's one basically that tells you what I plant through the year and when I plant it. Now, before I get into it, I really do want to stress that this video is about what I do. It does not necessarily apply to you. Now, if you live in Tasmania, as I do, it's going to be a rough guide. But still, in terms of planting, there is so much variation that can occur from one area to another, what I term microclimates or even subclimates within Tasmania. Altitudes, whether you're by the sea or inland, make a big difference. Look, this is also probably going to be helpful for some people in Victoria and anyone at a similar latitude. Remember, this is for the southern hemisphere, so when I'm talking about the months and the seasons here, it is southern hemisphere, not northern hemisphere. If you try to adapt it for the northern hemisphere, you're going to have to completely reverse the months. In terms of adapting it to your local area, one of the skills you need to learn as a gardener is to look and to read the season and to read the weather. Sometimes seasons come a little earlier or later than they normally do, and so you need to look for signs. Like here now, it is late winter, but I'm seeing the signs of spring, and I'm seeing them in the fact that the wattles are coming into flower here, the plum trees are about to open into flower, even the peaches, they're just about to burst into flowers. The daffodils are in flower too, but they are well established because they generally start flowering in midwinter here, which I know is not the normal thing for daffodils. They normally come in spring, but because our winters are so mild, they flower here during the winter. But for me, I'm seeing those signs of the approach of spring. I'm seeing the development, the growth starting to come as the days grow longer, and so I can start to prepare. Okay, so let's look at what I've got. Now, normally this is a program that is simply in my mind. It's not something that I write down generally, but for you, I've put it on paper so that I remember and can go over it. I do have a guide that is on the computer which I use for my rotation in terms of the garden, but again, it's not comprehensive. Now, I'm going to start in August, which is the month that I'm in now, because while that might be an odd time of the year, it's not the beginning of the year, and you might say, why not start in January? August for us is the time when the gardening cycle begins. July, the month before, really for me is a no planting month. There's rarely ever that I would plant anything in July. The sun levels are so low here, it is so cool, cloudy, often raining, that planting things in July is pretty pointless. They're not going to develop, they're not going to grow. But August, when you see those signs of spring, it's time. Now, the first thing that I plant in spring is what I'm hoping to plant this afternoon, if the weather will permit me, is broad beans. Look, it's one of the easiest legumes to grow here in Tasmania, and a lot of people plant it in autumn, but I find that I prefer to plant it in spring. I've got a couple of videos about it. I'll put a link in the corner to one of those for you. Along with some broad beans, I often will plant at this time of the year some early cabbages that will develop into summer. Now, a word on brassicas planting this time of the year, because as you move to November, you're going to get the cabbage white butterfly around. You do need to be prepared to net them to keep that off. The only other thing that I generally plant in August is my early potatoes. Now, you'll see here potatoes growing in the greenhouse, which were planted before winter, or at the beginning of winter should I say, but the early outside potatoes I would start in August, and I will start them under plastic. So for a couple of weeks they may be still under black plastic, where the garden at the moment is Although the area the potatoes are going in is under black plastic right now, and I would leave that on with the potatoes underneath for a couple of weeks. Once they start to show through the ground, I would change that to clear plastic, and as they develop and we have less likelihood of frost, I would take that off. Now, given that our last likely frost where we live is around mid-October, this is still a risk putting them out so early, but generally it pays off. So that's August. So September is when I start my main planting, because you're moving into spring proper. We often get a lot of rain still in September, or at least showery weather like we're getting this afternoon. Early in September I will start planting things like silver beet, that is seed. I'll put seed out. I may put out broccoli plants, and I may also put out English spinach plants preferably, but seeds would be okay at that time too. Towards the middle of September I will plant carrots, beetroot, and also parsnips. So those things will tolerate the cool, and with the moisture that you're getting early in spring here, they come on nice and quickly. I also will plant cucumber, but only here in the greenhouse, not outside. It's still way too cold outside where we live for something like that, but I'll put seeds in the greenhouse and they will be coming along then quite quickly, because it's starting to really get warm here in the daytime. The other brassica that you can plant early September, or possibly even back in August, I forgot to mention, is kale. You can also plant kale in autumn and let it come through winter, but if you're starting it in spring, you're going to have that kale growing quite successfully all the way until the next spring, which it will go to seed. So you'll get a good year's growth out of it. The other thing that you may want to think about at the very beginning of September, or possibly even late August, depending where you are, is to start some tomato seeds if you're wanting to start them as seedlings indoors. Now, I at the moment have got some set to, they haven't germinated yet, but you know, I'm keeping those by the fire at the moment and keeping them warm. If you have a heat pad, you would use that and get them underway. But in terms of putting out tomato seed, I have grown them successfully putting out seed at the end of September. Putting it in the ground, it won't germinate quickly at that point, but once it does germinate, it will start to grow and move very fast as the weather warms. Okay, moving through to October now. At the beginning of October, I would consider planting capsicums or peppers in the greenhouse, but not outdoors. But in the greenhouse where it's a bit warmer, you could start them. Around the middle of October to late October, I would start my mid-crop of potatoes. Now, as it's now that point now safe from frosts, you can just put them in the ground and away they'll go. And having those two stages, a really early crop and a mid crop, or a main crop if you'd like to call it that, is really good. It gives you a little bit of staging. That way you can keep potatoes going pretty much all year. Now, it's at the end of October here that I do the outdoor planting of many of the things that like the warmer weather. So that includes cucumbers outdoors, it includes zucchinis, pumpkins, sweet corn, and I'm talking about seed. I would also, at that point, right at the end of October, put out tomato seedlings. They'll be really ready to go now, and with that warmer weather, away they'll go. Everything will start to develop quite quickly, but generally for where I live, I don't plant those things before the very last week or the last weekend of October. And look, if there's any doubt about the weather and you leave it to early November, it's really not going to make a lot of difference. It's in the beginning of November, probably the first week is a good time to actually plant beans. So talking about like French beans, climbing beans. I generally grow climbing varieties because it saves a lot of space. But wait until the ground is really getting nice and warm. So usually that is early November. Though I have to say last year October was warm. I put them in October because it was so warm, and then November, the whole month was cool, which really wasn't very good. It impeded development. But that's the way it is here in Tasmania. The seasons can be quite changeable. Now, coming to December, there's generally only one thing that I plant in December, and that is leeks. Now, you'll often see leeks around a lot earlier, and a lot of people will plant them even in autumn or during winter or early spring. I plant them in December because I want my leeks ready in autumn or to eat during winter. If you plant them early, you're going to find that the leeks are ready to eat in summer, and we're not that much into eating leeks in summer because we mostly use them for things like soup or stir fries. So those cooked foods are more our autumn winter diet, so that's when we want them ready to harvest. Okay, coming across to January now. Early in January is when I would plant my late crop of potatoes ideally. Sometimes it gets left to late January, but the earlier you can plant them in January, unless they're really well developed, the better crop you're going to get from that late crop of potatoes. If you leave it too late, which I've had that happen, circumstances have often forced me to be late, and the actual crop that you harvest is fairly poor. So early January, the ideal time for a late crop of potatoes. And you'll be digging that during winter. I've only just finished digging my late crop of potatoes now. February is when I start to look towards autumn. At the end of February, I would start to plant things like cauliflowers, broccoli again, and cabbage that I'm going to eat over winter. Also English spinach again could go in. Don't want to leave those things too late if you're actually wanting to harvest them during winter. Now look, I don't usually plant a late crop of carrots. I usually only plant one crop of carrots for the entire year. But if you're planting a late crop of carrots, here I would probably be looking at doing that back in January. I didn't mention that one, but it's not something that I generally do. And as I said, this is more about what I do than a guide for everything. March is the last chance that I look to for planting those brassicas, as I mentioned, the collies, the broccoli, the cabbage, for winter use. And if you're too late, you'll find things don't develop until spring, and then they can very quickly run to flower and to seed. So try and get them that little bit earlier if you can. So late February, early March for those brassicas. Okay, coming to April. April is the month where I plant garlic, and I usually do it early in April, but to mid-April, it's quite flexible. Garlic, look, some people don't plant it even much later and it still is fine. I grow both proper garlic and also elephant garlic. Late in April, I would look at planting broccoli into the greenhouse, like this sort of crop. This one was a little bit late. If you can get it earlier, it's better. And you'll be then able to harvest either during winter or early in spring. So if you've got a greenhouse, you can get that later crop of broccoli in. May is not a month that I do plant a lot. It is a month where you could start thinking about broad beans if you want to plant them early. I prefer to plant August and get a later crop, but if you want to plant them early, you can start thinking about broad beans. You could also think about possibly snow peas, spring onions. It's a good time to get spring onions in May, whether you're planting seeds or seedlings. Seedlings, of course, you can also plant in spring. I didn't mention that, but I often have spring onions going over multiple years, where I've planted them one year and then harvest for 2 or 3, and they continue to rejuvenate themselves because I don't take them all out. June, again, is a time you can plant snow peas. You could plant a late crop in terms of August, but a June crop is going to get a head start. It will start growing over winter and really take off quickly in the spring. And as I've said before, I also plant a June crop of potatoes in the greenhouse. I also this year did plant some in May, so a little bit of staging from one bed to another. But for here, those winter potatoes are strictly indoors. But they do okay and give a little bit of extra food. Now, there's a couple of things that I haven't mentioned in this in going through the year. One is I didn't mention onions because I haven't actually been growing onions on a regular basis. Onions, of course, you could plant probably from June through until September. I'm going to put some in probably in September. I've actually got here some seedlings started and they will go out in September. The other thing that you'll notice I haven't mentioned is lettuce. Now, I grow lettuce and I pretty much grow lettuce all through the year. I find that I can plant lettuce here whether it's early autumn, spring, late spring to summer. It all really depends on the variety. Choosing varieties that will overwinter will allow you to have it through the winter fine, and all the other varieties will generally grow from spring on. So lettuce is pretty flexible if you've got the correct variety. That's a rough guide as to what I do, and as I've said, it's not a comprehensive planting guide to all things that you may want to grow. It's simply what I plant, and it really applies to Tasmania, but you may be able to adapt it to your area. Hopefully that's been helpful for you. The rain is lightening up, so I might be able to get out and get those broad beans planted this afternoon yet.